falls, you ain't got no home. We need each other. Gentrification, we need each other. Political crisis, police brutality, we need each other. And let me not start listing the names of who's getting shot and who's getting killed this month. All right? People of color, not just people of African descent, but people of color are being attacked and killed randomly. Black folks, the highest rate. So if we don't work together and we don't unite, what's going to happen to us?
The journey of knowing thyself begins in the cradle and ends in the grave. One way to capture those moments of ourself can be found in the shelf. Shelves have been around since the creation of ancient scrolls. My name is Dr. Walter Hidalgo, and I'm a father, teacher, world traveler, and coach. Join me as we explore together the stories of our shelves. This is Know Thyself.
Watch this.
Peace, 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 beautiful family. This is Dr. Walter Hidalgo, and this is the Know Thyself podcast, and this is episode numero 21. The Know Thyself podcast utilizes the metaphor of the shelf to extrapolate the self. And we're going to jump right into this topic today. It's going to be a sensitive one, but it's only right that we discuss what I'm about to get into, given the circumstances that we are all in. But I just definitely want to first give a big shout out to our silent protesters. I do not want to give a shout out to people that are destroying our neighborhoods, that are vandalizing. I believe in nonviolent protesting. So, given that, I want to talk about, the reality of what is happening right now. People are marching all over the world, everywhere. What we are witnessing, my brothers and sisters, is actually a lot of the work that I did in my post-grad research. We are witnessing a reawakening. Not an awakening, because we stay woke, or so they say. But we are experiencing a reawakening. And it's a beautiful and scary thing. And it's not a coincidence it's happening in 2020. Not a coincidence that it's happening as we continue to battle this COVID situation. And it's 100,000,000% not a coincidence why it's a continuing expansion of what I like to say a spiritual reawakening that began in 2012, 2012 to be exact. Let's jump into 2000. Sergeant Cornell Young. For those that don't know, Sergeant Cornell Young was killed while he was undercover. So backstory is there was a place that people would go hang out called Fighters in Providence, Rhode Island, where I'm originally from. Shout out to RI. And there was a scuffle between two people. And Sergeant Cornell, he was dressed in plain clothing, and he tried to intervene the situation. He pulled out his gun, and two officers came in, and instead of pointing the gun at the culprits, they pointed it at him and shot 6 times and killed him. And this created a ripple effect all around Rhode Island and really to myself, because it was an incident of racial profiling. Because in this particular case, what made the situation really iffy was the fact that he was dressed in plain clothing, and one of the officers that shot him went to the same academy school in Rhode Island that he did. And on top of that, his father was actually a sergeant. Excuse me, I'm not too sure if he was a sergeant, but he was somebody in a high-ranking position in Rhode Island law enforcement. And I think for me, that really set the tone for a lot of the work that I continue to do. In fact, in 2000, right after that happened, in January of 2000, following that summer, I started college. And I decided to major in criminal justice, and I minored in political science. And I'll never forget that brother. You know, this is the image of him. For those who are not watching, I'm speaking of Sergeant Cornell Young. And it really spoke to a lot of, it speaks to a lot what is happening right now. And I can't tell you how disheartening it is when I see, continue to see what's happening out here in real time. People are speaking up through social media, and people are showing up through protests. And I want to take this time to speak my truth, to speak up. I did the whole protesting thing. I'm kind of done with that. I feel like that's not where my heart is anymore with protesting. So I just definitely in a place right now that I want to approach things differently. For me, my truth I speak when I work and do the work every single day with what I do. But I think it's important that, we understand that for a cop to kill someone just by profiling them is a huge concern in our world right now. That's something that speaks to me. That's very eerie to me, because that's where the whole racial profiling concept comes from. You're profiling a race, a so-called race, and that race extends. It has multiple colors. It has a huge spectrum. So we can't just speak of, racial profiling in the sense of a race, but even a culture. Black culture is not just a color. It's aesthetics. It's music. It's art. It's beauty. It's so many things. And really, what we got to understand is that I want to approach and talk about the psychology of race real briefly, the mind, because I can only speak my truth. But I know this. As a quote-unquote Latino, as somebody that's Guatemalan, born in the U.S., immigrant parents that came to this country, I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood in the south side of Providence, Rhode Island. And I experienced racism in multiple layers. I experienced it from a black police officer who abused, took advantage, and profiled many of my friends, black and brown mostly. I've been profiled by predominantly white police officers saying racial slurs, but for the most part, it wasn't too intense. I felt a lot of times the racial tensions were actually between Latinos. Y'all know what I'm talking about, Latinos, right? Latinx. It's something that we've been conditioned to think that being dark-skinned or someone of color, particularly black, is a bad thing. It's an ugly thing. That's why a lot of so-called Latinos associate themselves more with their European complex versus their African indigenous complex. So I raise that and say that it's across the board. Is this sort of like big paintbrush of something much more bigger and deeper, that it disheartens me that we feel that being black or associated with African is bad, is dirty. So the flip side is that everything that's white is pure, is right. And that, I've seen that across the board. Now we're talking, now we're getting into beyond the mental. We're moving beyond our own spheres and communities and extending ourselves out to this world. And I saw that when I went to college, right? I'll never forget, I was in my dorm room and I played football, and most of my teammates were black, right? And black. And we're in this dorm room, and it's, mostly, white dudes, white girls, right? And I stayed, and my other friends left, and I told her friend, yo, why is your other friend acting kind of funny? And she says to me, I'll be really honest with you. That was the first time she's been this close around black people. Yo, that bugged me out. That bugged me out. Like, yo, what planet are you from? Like, who are you associating yourself with, right? It really tripped me out, family. And, I'm moving from the psychology of racial profiling into systemic racism, because I started to see racism the more I left the comfort of my neighborhood. Right? To hear someone say that blew my mind away. But the reality is that we do see racism systemically, because people like Dr. Cone and so many others, right, speak on and touch on white supremacy. And what white supremacy really is when you think about people, who are the people in position of power, right? Across the board, we see a lack of representation of people of color in the school systems, right? Just look at who are your superintendents, who are those leaders, right? Who are their bosses, right? Over 90% of our schools are taught by white females, right? The government. Look at our Senate. Me as a teacher traveling and going to conferences, who's most present? A lot of times it's mostly white, right? And that could even go further down, even to religion. Specifically, this country as one that is a Christian country, you see a lot more of white preachers. And no disrespect, we see that even in Catholicism, where we see a lack of representations of blacks in this country as priests or deacons. We're seeing a shift, but the reality is that even within those stained glass windows, we continue to see that white Jesus. And that's a concern for me, because that's the psychology. That's the system. That's you thinking that that's how you should look like, act like, be like, and talk like. What's happening right now is showing and continuing to show us that the system is broken. I was just watching the Rodney King documentary on Netflix, and it looked parallel to the T as to what's happening right now. Not at that level. That was pretty bad. Casualties, deaths, the vandalism, etc. But it was very real and very similar to what's happening right now. Amadou Diallo, right, in New York. That stirred up. I mean, how many times did that brother get shot? Yeah. Like 40, 50 times. I mean, Sergeant Cornell in Rhode Island, Trayvon Martin in Florida. I mean, that really set the tone for this generation, particularly for the millennials. That set the tone. Trayvon Martin in Florida set the tone for the Black Lives Matter, set the tone for a lot of things. To begin to penetrate the systematic racial profiling and racism that exists in this country, in this world. And finally, with what's happening with George Floyd in Minnesota. The Know That Shelf podcast, again, utilizes the metaphor of the shelf to extrapolate the self. So one of the things we do is we try to pull things from our shelf that can help you in your day-to-day, particularly with what's going on. So right now I feel like I want to pull these things out of the shelf relating to what's happening right now. So tips that can help you cope during this time. Because what we're experiencing right now is hurt, pain, trauma, anger, anxiety, resentment. You know, all these things that I'm feeling too, family. But it's important that we talk about this. The first thing that I suggest you do to the best of your ability is articulate your emotions. That's step one that I recommend. Don't let the emotions cloud your rationale. What we're seeing with people breaking windows, causing riots, which, by the way, who knows if that's being insinuated by the CIA or being like, yo, I'm not even gonna go there right now, family. We don't even got time for that. But the reality is that expressing yourself violently doesn't work, because if you do it violently, it will end violently. Live by the sword, die by the sword. It's important that we articulate our emotions and look at how we can begin to strategize and change the system. Boots on the ground, head and heart ready to play. Don't let the emotions and the excitement get to you and steer you away from the civilization of love we're trying to create here in this world. The second thing, know your triggers. I had to self-regulate myself, watching a lot of the violence. You know, my boy sent me this video right here. For those that aren't seeing it on Facebook Live and other outlets, it's people vandalizing an area in Manhattan. Like that's anger, you know, and it's exacerbated and further perpetuated in social media, either through video, through words, through subliminal messages. Be careful with what we're articulating and saying and sharing on social media. I've been talking about this for a long time. It's extremely important. The other thing is community support. It's important that you reach out to people that you can be vulnerable and share this stuff with, because this stuff hurts. I saw a video of a young girl who posted an IG live of a conversation that she was having with her parents. And let me tell you something. A lot of the reason this stuff is happening is because we continue to, unfortunately, have to deal with elderly, racist people that still think it's okay with what's happening right now. But there's a different generation. There's a different movement. And we're seeing it in the streets this evening, tomorrow, and who knows for how long. Hopefully it'll end much sooner than later, right, family? The last thing is self-care. Take care of yourself. Continue to meditate, pray, reflect, breathe. But more importantly, as it relates to the spiritual aspect and with self-care, I want to pose a question, and that is, what are you going to do different when we get back to normal, however that is? Given everything that happened, what are you going to do now that you've done these steps, saw what you saw, reflected on it? What are you going to do different? Because what I'm seeing different is white bodies going in front of black bodies on the front lines in front of cops while these protests is happening, and that's a little different than what it was when it happened with Trayvon, to an extent. It's a reawakening, family. Something very powerful is happening. I'm a sociologist, so I always look at things systemically, socially, not just thinking of myself. I'm thinking beyond myself. Everything that I shared here, it's being vulnerable and sharing my story. We need to be intentional about our stories and share how we've been affected, how we were a George Floyd, God forbid, not to that extent, right? But how have we seen or witnessed a Trayvon Martin in our own neighborhoods? We need to share that so we can combat it and end it. All right, family, to close us out, as we always do, with a quote. This quote reads as such: "An injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Dr. King. Peace, family.
That's why they hate on you. So that's why they hate on you. So that's why they hate on you. So that's why they hate on you.